All right. Well, I've got a little after 10 on my computer and right at 10 on my phone, so we'll go ahead and get started. Appreciate everyone who is able to join us. I've put my cell phone in the chat in the event you lose connection, get kicked out or something, experience troubles, you can send me a text or call me. I have placed co-host on several individuals in the group. So hopefully if I overlook someone trying to get back in, somebody else will notice it. Do apologize. I know it took us multiple attempts to get this one pulled off, and the weather wasn't very favorable back earlier on. Having folks without electric or snowed in on the farm needed to be taking care of their animals that day, and so we pushed it back a few times to try to get away from weather. I know obviously in some parts of the state today we're still dry, no rain yet, and folks still busy. Here in other parts starting to get some rain. With all that said, appreciate everyone's participation today. Feel free to unmute or type into chat as we go along if you have questions, and obviously be plenty of time for discussion after the presentation as well. We want to thank Dr. Jeffrey Bewley for joining us today. He's here with us representing Hosting USA, and will be presenting some information to us in regards of DNA testing. And so the topic I shared that we'd like to see based on conversation with producers is, so I DNA tested my herd, now what? And so Jeffrey's going to give us the now what today. And Jeffrey, we appreciate you joining us. We'll turn the program over to you.
All right. Thanks, Nick. Thanks for the opportunity to speak to the group today. Looking forward to some good questions and good discussion. Always enjoy the discussion with this particular group. I spent a lot of time thinking about this, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about genetics and genomic testing over the last few years. And really, it's become my hobby. And in the last year in particular, I've studied it a lot more, and I find myself in the evenings spending a lot of time just looking at genetic evaluations and so forth. So it's fun for me. It's an interesting area. It's an exciting area, and looking forward to sharing with you what I know about the topic, which admittedly I'm still learning also. One of the things I would say is that Nick sent me the topic of, so I tested my herd, now what? And as I thought about that, I thought that's probably not the right way to think about it. And I think that's the first thing to talk about, is that realistically, you need to have a plan of what you're going to do with the data before you do the genomic testing. If you don't have a plan, you really may not need to do the genomic testing. You have to know what you're going to do with that data. Otherwise, I think it's kind of a waste of money. If you just have information and you don't use it to change a decision, then it's not going to be a useful and economic exercise. You need to have the plan of what we're going to do with it. So I think it's still the same basic idea here, but I want to talk more about a background of genomics and genetic evaluations, where we're at right now, and how you might want to use that data. I think it's really exciting how to use it, but be careful in using it without a plan. For dairy producers in Kentucky, which is most of the people here on the call are either in Kentucky or support the dairy industry in Kentucky, there's a neat opportunity sitting in front of you with the new Milk 4.0 program that the Kentucky Dairy Development Council is putting together. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more later. But basically, this program is going to allow you to do genomic testing at a less expensive cost than probably anybody's been able to do it before. I think it's a neat opportunity, and it does change the economics of doing genomic testing compared to what other people in other parts of the country or other parts of the world might have been able to do thus far. So just a little bit of background, if we look at history, and we could extend this even further down into the past, we know that we continue to increase production per cow. Milk production continues to increase. And sometimes people say, how much milk can we really get out of cows? What's the biological limit for what a cow could produce? And I would say at minimum, the biological limit is somewhere around 80,000 pounds in a year, because we've had a cow that has done that. Does that mean every cow can do 80,000 pounds? No, but what that says to me is that genetically, we have not tapped out the milk production potential of the animal yet. There's still potential to get more milk out of the animal, but it's more than just milk. And that's a big part of the opportunity that sits in front of us now with genetics. We've also made a lot of progress in areas like somatic cell count. So in the last couple of decades, we've made a lot of progress in somatic cell count. A lot of that's management, but part of that is through genetics. And one of the most important lessons that I think we have historically in the industry with regard to genetics is thinking about what we did to fertility. For years, I think we focused almost exclusively on milk production. And you see in the solid red line and the blue dash line, these are the trends for milk production genetics over time. We dramatically increased by almost 10,000 pounds the genetic milk production capability of the animal. But unfortunately, for the first few decades of AI, we did that without thinking about what that might do to fertility. And there's a negative correlation between milk production and fertility. Some of that's physiological and some of that's genetic. But if we just select for milk and we ignore fertility, we will have what we have. What would happen is we reduce the fertility of animals. Growing up, I think about easily being able to get 55, 60% conception rates, and then we know that we don't see that as much anymore. But we have started turning the tide. If you look at the genetic trends, starting in the early 2000s, we've actually started improving fertility again, because we started putting the emphasis on fertility in our genetic evaluations. And I show this because I think, first of all, it's encouraging to see that we have made some improvements in fertility, but there's an important historical lesson here to not just select for one trait at a time. The other thing that's happened is genomics has really, really changed genetics over the last decade. And this just shows the average age of parents of bulls in AI and cows in AI. You can see what's happened across time. In the last few years, we've really shortened the generation interval. We're moving really, really rapidly now in genetic progress, more rapidly than any time in history. And I think that's why genetics really becomes even more critical now in staying competitive, because you have to be constantly moving and constantly improving to be able to keep up with the rest of the industry, because the genetic progress is so fast now. It's also important, of course, to remember that genetics is only a piece of the puzzle. Genetics is part of the base of success on a dairy, but those genetics only work if we have good nutrition, good forages, good animal health, good reproductive performance, good cow comfort, and overall management. All the pieces come together, and genetics is a piece of that. We can't look at genetics in a vacuum and assume that if we breed for X, that's exactly what's going to happen. It's a combination of what genes the animal has and then what we do with the animal once she's on the farm. And that's the old basic equation. The phenotype is what we see. So if we think about milk production, what that cow gives for milk is a combination of her genetics and her environment. And when we say environment there, it's not just the physical environment. It's not just the barn, for example. It's everything to do with the care. It comes down to colostrum, nutrition. Everything in that animal's life is her environment. So what we see in the end with that animal is a combination of both the genetics and the environment. And we describe the genetic contribution in terms of heritability. So heritability is the percentage of variation in a trait that is attributed to genetics. So if we look at yield, for example, the various yield traits, the heritability is 15 to 30%. We get into some of the fitness traits, look at like some of the fertility traits, the heritability is only 1 to 2%, meaning only 1 to 2% of the differences that we see in fertility are because of genetics. Now, some people interpret that to mean that if a trait's not very heritable, then we can't do a lot of progress. And that's not really the case. It just means there's a lot of other factors that go into the success of fertility or whether an animal becomes sick or whatever. But this is an important part of understanding genetics, is that what we see is not just genetics, it's everything else that happened in that animal's life. The next opportunity that we have, and this is here now, is we have the opportunity to breed more resilient and more robust cows. Cows that are tougher, cows that can handle more, cows that can last longer. And because of the new traits that we have at our disposal now, I think there's never been a more exciting time to do genetic selection. We can breed a different kind of cow than what we thought about on the home farm 20 or 30 years ago. I think it's really exciting. So the question that I have, and I'd like to get some feedback on this, is what type of cow should we breed for? So I'm going to ask people to take off their mics and express their opinions here. And if you don't, I will call you out. Fred, what kind of cow do you want to breed for?
The pink one.
The pink one, okay. What kind of cow do you want?
I don't think you can say one particular kind.
No, I mean, well, what traits are important to you? Maybe that's another way to express the question.
Right now, we're doing everything polled.
Okay.
In anticipation of that, we've gone backwards, in our traits, in our like net merit numbers and that kind of thing have gone backwards because of that. But it's getting better, with each proof.
Yeah.
But
definitely improving.
But still, production is still king.
Okay. Production pays the bills, right?
Yep.
Okay. Brandon, I see you're on. What are you going to tell us here? What do you want to look for in cow?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
So for me, I think it's important that we try to improve the fertility, especially here in Kentucky. I try to watch the wellness traits, but I still think it's important to use cows with good conformation, bulls with good conformation. I am also using quite a few polled bulls myself. I think that's part of what we are going to need going forward. To me, it's more important to have good components than to have maybe the extreme production bulls. I still use a few of those. I would rather improve health traits right now if I had to choose, and you don't really have to take one over the other, but I would rather have a bull with moderate production and really good health trait, because I think that's where we're the most behind.
Okay, great. David, what do you think?
There you go. I said I like a good solid cow, but I don't want to compromise the milk and the fat. I still, you know, I gotta have the milk in the tank.
Milk and fat, you said?
What do you say?
I didn't hear you. What'd you say?
Milk and fat, is that what you said?
Well, and just a good healthy cow, you know, I mean, I don't want to give up. I don't want to give up much production. I think we got to keep pushing the production.
All right. Good. Jennifer Hickerson typed in longevity. It's a good point. Let's see.
Well,
go ahead, David.
we look, you know, I don't want to breed to a bull I try not to breed to a bull now that's negative in daughter pregnancy rate and negative in productive life, you know, and there's enough choices out there that you can do that. And I haven't used very many pole bulls. We just started trying to use the salve and take the horns off when they're real little, and went on the other way. But I do think the poles will be okay. They're really gaining, and at some point in time, you know, I may switch over to that too, because that would definitely make life a lot easier.
Beth, what would you like to see out there?
Who?
I would ask Beth. Beth Cox, she's on.
Can you hear me, Jeffrey?
Yes.
Okay. I would have to say I agree with Brandon. I mean, longevity and durable cows that are going to be healthy, that are going to stay around for a while, and that would be my pick. Not to compromise milk by no means, but cow that stays around to that longer lactation is going to make you more money.
Good. All right. Meredith, what about you?
I think it's a combination of things, Jeffrey, but the big thing is longevity of the cow herself that will stay in the milk tank. She can give a lot of milk, but if you have to keep her out of the tank week out of the month, cause problems, and she's probably not a moneymaker.
Okay, so that's an interesting sellable milk, not just milk produced, right?
Exactly.
Donna, what do you want to see?
An invisible cow.
Great.
That's what I talked about last week.
Yep.
And a lot of those traits they've talked about were in my cow.
Don, don't worry about the invisible cow. You just don't want the invisible bull around.
No, I want him to be visible so I know where to avoid him.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying.
All right. Larissa, what do you think? What would you like to see?
Well, I think we also need to add in some good type traits in there. You know, we want those good feet and legs that help hold up and last longer, and some things along those lines as well.
Okay, good. Leslie, what about you? We've got some young participants here in the talk today.
So I kind of agree with everybody. They say that, you know, the longevity of the cow and the ability to produce milk without having the wrong breed and having the correct like A and I stuff is obviously important, but with the cow, it needs to be, you know, correct nutrition. And if you're looking for a cow, it needs to be like not too fat and not too malnourished. I mean, there's a lot of things that can go into the correct breed.
Great. Body condition is another interesting trait. Nikki, what about you? You're in a different world. Anything else you want to look for?
Yeah, I will be a little bit biased. I agree with everybody said, but I would like to see the udder information and shorter milking times.
Shorter milking time.
Yeah, like shorter milking time so
Okay.
we can milk the cow faster.
Can they go too fast?
Well, I don't know. But that I'm biased, so.
Nikki works for Deal and Val with the robotic milking, and so looks at it a little bit different. There's some things we can select specifically for robotic milking. Milking speed is an interesting trait because I think there's probably an optimal milking speed. I think if you can get milking speed too fast, and when they milk out too fast, it's because their teat openings are big, and then that means they're going to be at more risk for mastitis. But there's a happy medium there. Good. Jenna, what do you think? Okay, not hearing from Jenna right now. I see it, Marie. I don't know Marie, but do you have an opinion, Marie? Okay. Dave, is that you or H?
That's me.
What do you like to see?
In what part now?
No, sorry, I'm looking at the phone. I don't know if that's Dave Roberts or H Barlow's number there. Nick, you have any other ideas?
Cow that's bred to be adaptable to the environment.
Adaptable to the environment. Interesting one. Cool. Pat, what about you?
You want to get for dinner?
Okay. Important job. Anybody else think of anything else as we're sitting here? Well, I've thought about this a lot, and I think that in the end, most of us kind of want our cake and eat it too. And it's really complex to build the ideal cow. Most of the things that are important, I think we mentioned through the discussion there. Really, really great discussion. I appreciate the feedback there. There's a couple that we didn't necessarily talk about. One of them that I think is really important and is becoming increasingly important is feed efficiency. Long term, for the economic success of the dairy and for the sustainability of the dairy industry. We talked about disease resistance, we talked about confirmation, and there's some other things to think about. We'll get into all these a little bit, but ultimately, there are a number of different things that we want to look at simultaneously. And I think that one of the most important things to think about in the beginning is what's your objective. Everyone has a little bit different breeding objectives, and it's not necessarily a one-size-fits-all scenario, and that's okay. Everybody has a different strategy, but I think it's important to understand what target are you trying to hit, because if you don't know what you're trying to hit, you're definitely not going to hit it. So define what's important to you. And genetic selection strategies and genomics can help you reach those targets. Both of these are tools. If your goal is to breed all polled animals. Genetics and genomics can help you breed all polled animals. If your goal is to breed all 90-point excellent cows, you can select for type and increase the likelihood that you breed excellent cows. If your goal is to just get milk and you don't care about fertility or health or whatever, you can select in that direction. But pick your set of goals. It becomes overwhelming. And to be honest, I think it's becoming a little bit more overwhelming because we keep getting more traits. And I don't think that's going to stop. I think we're going to continue to get more and more traits, and that makes it more complicated. Before we get into some of the index selections, just a little bit of background on how we do genetic evaluation. So we have something called a PTA, which is a predicted transmitting ability. It's the estimated genetic merit that an animal transmits to its offspring. How that's calculated, there are 4 different things that go into that number. One is the ancestors. So that cow's mother and father and grandmother and great-grandmother and cousins and sisters, all that goes into the calculation. That individual animal's records, once that animal starts producing, then that affects her PTAs. If she has calves that are in the herd, then that affects her PTA. And genomics gives us an indication of the PTA for the animal. So there are 4 different things that go into that calculations. And when those calculations are done, basically you're comparing the animal to her herd mates so that you account for the environmental effects. And this is one of the reasons why sometimes I get a little concerned if somebody says, I bought a herd bull out of a good cow. I bought it out of a good cow because she gave 30,000 pounds of milk. Okay, first of all we know is milk. But secondly, a 30,000 pound cow genetically is very different if she's in a 40,000 pound herd than if she's in a 20,000 pound herd. If she's in a 40,000 pound herd, a 30,000 pound cow is well below average. If she's in a 20,000 pound herd, she's well above average. So the genetic evaluations account for the environment, the farm that she's in, and it accounts for age of the animal, season of calving, days dry, days open, management level. There's all kinds of things that go into this calculation to ensure that what we're accounting for is as close to possible as the genetic merit of that particular animal. Another important concept to think about, this goes back to your basic biology, is the Punnett square, if you don't remember that. But I just want to review this because I think it's becoming increasingly important to think about this as we start thinking about single gene dominant or recessive traits. So just want to review this with you here. We have 2 examples here. Big P stands for pole. Little p stands for horn. Okay? So in this case, we have a blue, we're going to say is the male, and pink is the female. So in this case, we have big P, little p. We would call that a heterozygous because it has 2 different copies of the gene. This is a heterozygous polled animal. Because polled is dominant, this animal doesn't have horns. Phenotypically, it doesn't have horns. This animal is homozygous because both genes are the same. Homozygous horn, little p, little p. Little p, horned is recessive, polled is dominant. If we breed these 2 animals to each other, then the math works like half the time, and we get 2 little p's half the time. So in the end, with this mating, 50% of our animals, our offspring, are going to be polled, and 50% are going to be horned. Now let's take this example. We've got the same cow, but we breed her to a homozygous polled bull. If we breed her to a homozygous polled bull that has big P, then every animal is big P, little p. And in that case, the phenotype of that animal is that we see all polled animals. So we can quickly move to polled. if we use all homozygous bulls. We could do this for any of these traits that are dominant like that. The challenge, though, that I think we have to think about a little bit more is with recessive genes. So these are the little letters, if you want to think about them that way. And one of the double-edged swords, so to speak, of genomics is that we know more of these now, and we're going to keep finding more recessive traits. These are mutations that occur, and a lot of these have been around for a while. Things like GLAD that was identified in the 80s is largely out of the breed now because we can select it out by not using those bulls. But what we do see now is a lot of animals that carry these traits, HH1, HH2 through HH6. These are haplotypes that have a negative effect on fertility. What happens is if you have a carrier, so you have a bull that's HH1, let's say, and you have a cow that's HH1. Because it's recessive, if they're a carrier, you don't know it. They don't express the gene. But the challenge is if they get one copy from the male and one copy from the female at the embryonic level, then that embryo doesn't survive to be a calf. It depends on which version of the HHs, at what point in the gestation period that calf dies, but that calf never becomes a cow. So these have a negative effect on fertility. Now, what should we do about it? The easiest thing to do is to avoid using a bull that has one of these traits, because then you won't ever have that problem because it will never express it. All your herd could have HH5 and they're carriers, but if you don't use a bull, then you'll never have expression of it. So the easiest thing to do is just avoid those recessive traits on the male side. Now, there may be a bull every now and then that you say, I really, really like everything about that bull. I've got to use that bull, even though he carries that trait. That's okay, but be careful with the mating. And that's one of the places where genomic testing can come in. If you know which animals are carriers of these genes, then you can avoid those matings to those particular bulls. HCD is also a concerning one. These animals basically have really weak immune systems and they don't live very long. They tend to die as heifers, not as calves. So we're going to continue to see more of these. I think it's an important thing to look at, and particularly for people that are buying herd bulls, be careful, because there are a lot of bulls that are carriers of these genes that are available to herd bulls because the AI company didn't necessarily want them. And then you're going to really spread that gene through your herd a lot if you're using that as a herd bull. Another reason why to think about doing genomic testing of herd bulls. Okay, another basic concept that I think is really important is that you can do all the genomic testing that you want, but if you're not using high-ranking bulls, it doesn't really matter. If you want to make genetic progress, you've got to use good bulls. Really important concept. If you don't use the right bulls, you're not going to make the progress that you want to make. Another important concept is to recognize that genetic selection comes from both parents. For years, we've really only thought about doing the selection from the male side because that's the only place where we did selection. We selected bulls either through AI or a herd bull to use as the parent of the next generation, and any female that was born on the farm, we brought into the herd. And so we really didn't do any true selection on the female side. But now, in the era of genomics, our thinking is starting to change on that to be able to do more selection on the female side. Because there's so many traits, we need, and we try to do this through a selection index. Selection indexes are basically big equations that combine a lot of the traits together to be able to provide a balanced animal. So we talked earlier about all those different things that we might want to look for. Well, these are trying to combine these in different ways. So there are a number of indexes that are out there that are publicly available for you to pick on your males, but now with genomic testing, you also have these on your females. And you also have the opportunity, if you want to, you could create your own index. So I actually kind of have my own index that I use because I want to put a little more emphasis on a couple of other traits. So which index should I use? It gets a little bit confusing. And here's kind of my breakdown on indexes. Net merit puts a bit more focus on productive life and livability. So for those of you that talk about wanting to have that cow that lasts a long time, healthy and so forth, perhaps net merit's the right one for you. Fluid merit actually may be the better option for dairy producers in Kentucky because fluid merit is really built more for a fluid milk market. The main difference is that fluid merit puts more emphasis on milk yield and no emphasis on protein. Daughter wellness profit puts more emphasis on health traits. So if you really want to push for the health traits, then daughter wellness profit may be a better fit for you. TPI, which is put out by the Holstein Association, and JPI, which is put out by the Jersey Cattle Club, those put a little bit more focus on type traits. So those that want to put a little bit more emphasis on what the cow looks like may want to use one of those indexes. But ultimately, if you're pushing toward the top for any of these indexes, you're going to end up with good animals. They're all highly correlated. So the top net merit bulls tend to be the top TPI bulls, that tend to be the top daughter wellness bulls, etc. And this graphs, no need to get into a lot of detail. They just show the weightings of the different traits. And partly I show this to show that if we look, for example, at net merit, over half of the emphasis is on production. And you say, well, why is there such a low percentage milk? This is fat pounds and protein pounds. So the emphasis is still on production here. And then some emphasis on type traits, fertility, through these, productive life, livability, and a little bit of emphasis on health traits. If you look at daughter wellness profit, on the other hand, it puts almost a quarter of the emphasis, almost 30% of the emphasis on health traits. So really a lot of emphasis on health traits in the daughter wellness profit index. TPI puts a little bit more emphasis on the type traits. One of the best places to start is thinking about where animals rank. We're thinking about using bulls. Where do they rank compared to the competition? And so if we look right now, the December proof, our 90th percentile bulls would be at least 579. 100th percentile bulls would be 806, and so on. So we want to think about this to see how are we breeding toward the top of the breed. And I think this is really, really critical. And this has changed so much over the last 2 decades. For the first 5 years of this century, we made about $16 worth of net merit progress per year. Then as genomics started coming into play, that bumped up to $44 per year. But now it's almost $80 of net merit progress per year. We have to keep moving our target of what we should be selecting for. So if you said today that the minimum net merit bull that I want to use is 600 net merit, a year from now, it should be 680. 2 years from now, it should be 760. So we've got to constantly move that bar up to be able to continue to put the same selection pressure on. And this is where I think some people get a little bit lax sometimes, is they say, well, 500 is good. Well, okay, 500 was good 3 or 4 years ago, but probably not good today. The real question, and I love these 2 studies. Chad Deckow, those of you that read Horton's Dairyman probably saw some of this work, but just recently showed this in the Horton's Dairyman. This was information that was presented at the Dairy Science meeting last year, where they actually looked 2 different studies where they compared if they looked at the actual genetic predictions for how profitable the animal is compared to actual profitability. So look at this daughter wellness profit. If we take the best animals for predicted profitability, what do we see? There's almost there's $800 difference in actual lifetime profit between the best genetic animals and the worst ones for daughter wellness profit. There's 1,500 pounds of income over feed cost difference. And look at the difference in lifetime energy corrected milk between the best and the worst animals. They last longer and they milk more across time. And then similarly, looking at net merit, they saw, this was a different study, but they saw a change in lifetime profit relative to increase in net merit. So if we use these indexes, net merit or daughter wellness profit, we will see an increase in profitability per animal. A herd with an average $439 advantage in average net merit will have a lower cost of production by $1 per hundredweight. Really pretty amazing. How do you get that? Well, more production, lower production costs, because we have better fertility, better health, better longevity. We can impact our cost of production by selecting for animals with a higher net merit. We know that diseases are expensive, so we can compare the different costs of disease. We all know that diseases are expensive. And this is one of the neat pieces now. We have the ability to select for animals that are more disease resistant, that there are multiple approaches to that. The Council for Dairy Cattle Breeding used to be done, the genetic evaluations used to be done by USDA, but now the Council for Dairy Cattle Breeding, CDCB, does genetic evaluations, and they have a series of health traits. Zoetis has a series of health traits. CMEX has something they call Immunity Plus. ABS has what they call Transition Right. CRV has Better Health. There are multiple ways that we could select for disease. How do we make sense of which one to use? In the end, they're all useful. They're all based on real world data, and they're likely valuable. Higher numbers are generally more favorable. They're relatively low heritability and reliability, so it's not going to see the same effect as if we just select for more milk, but we can see a very big effect. Sometimes they don't necessarily always agree with each other. Just use what's available. So if you use semen from a company that has daughter wellness profit, then look at theirs. If you use semen from a company that has Immunity Plus, then use theirs. But I think one of the things important, I'm a big fan of the health traits. And I think we should put a lot of emphasis. And I liked hearing from most of the group here that we wanted to look for the healthy traits. And as Donna said, the invisible cow. It's not the whole story, though. And so no matter what, we can go too far in one direction. And I think that it's important to remember that we can breed for the most healthy animal. But if that animal doesn't produce much milk, it's not a very profitable animal. And also, if we breed for health traits, that doesn't cover up bad management. So if we have our cows in dirty, nasty environments, we're still going to have milk quality problems. If we don't do a good job with our transition, housing, and nutrition, we're still going to have metabolic disease problems, no matter how much we breed genetically for healthier animals. It's only a piece of the puzzle. So how do we compare this? Let's look. There's a series of traits here. So if we look at CDCB wellness traits, for example, we compared two different bulls. Metritis, okay, Hagen's is better than Quickly. In VA, Quickly is actually a little bit better. We can go down here to the Zoetis traits. We even get in some calf traits. Livability, look at how much better Hagen's is than Quickly. So Hagen's is clearly going to have healthier calves. But you can see it's a little back and forth between the two bulls. And that's where it gets confusing. And that's where the indexes really come into play, because that helps us to sort through the fact that not every bull's the winner on everything. Every bull has their own strengths and weaknesses. The neat thing is that if we look at this data with it really reflects. So here's some data where they had a massive data set of information, and they compared the best and the worst animals in the herd for diseases. What they found was If you look at the best animals for their predictions for retained placentas compared to the worst, it reduced retained placentas by about half. If you look at the best compared to the worst for metritis, it reduced it by about half. For mastitis, it reduced it by about half. For lameness, not quite as much of an impact, but still, it reduced the number of lameness events. The best animals within a herd, and that's the way we got to look at this. Within a herd, same conditions, they actually have less disease. This stuff really works in the real world. Calf disease. This is amazing to me. Look at the difference in scours prevalence between the worst animals for scours. 60% of them had scours versus the best ones, only 14% of them had scours. Huge difference there. And we look at another interesting thing, and this one's really a little bit mind-blowing to me, because it says that maybe we've not always been looking at the right things. We look at the correlation. Correlation, 0 means there's no relationship whatsoever to 1 being a perfect relationship. So if we want to improve reproduction, in the past we might have said let's do it through productive life, but the correlation between productive life and daughter pregnancy rate is only about 0.56. So it's relatively strong, but not that strong of a correlation. The relationship between somatic cell score, which we've had since the mid-90s, and actual mastitis count cases, it's only about half. That's why selecting for mastitis is different than selecting for somatic cell count. Both are important, but different. Productive life and lameness, very weak. Here's the one that really blows my mind. The correlation between feet and leg composite and lameness, negative 0.01. There is essentially no relationship between feet and leg composite and the animal's ability to, or susceptibility to becoming lame. This says to me, we've really been looking at the wrong things. And if we want to breed for that mobile cow, we should look for susceptibility to lameness, not feet and leg composite. That's kind of a game changer. Again, real world data, looking at the immunity plus, and this just shows that there's significant reduction in disease for the animals that are immunity plus designated. Nick kind of talked about this just a little bit, but this is on the horizon now, is to start selecting for animals that are more heat tolerant. We know that there are differences in heat tolerance levels among animals. Australia is the first country that has implemented a genetic index for heat tolerance. Animals that are better able to deal with the heat. And so you can actually, if you're really geeky like me, you can go look that list up and find out which animals, which bulls in the US population are better for heat tolerance than others. But this is coming to the US. We will, before long, be able to select for animals that are more heat tolerant within a breed. And I think that's really exciting, particularly in the climate that we have here in Kentucky. A new trait that just was introduced in December of 2020 is feed save. Massive amount of research and development has gone into developing this trait. It's selecting for animals that save feed compared to what they're predicted to eat based on their production and their size. So this gives us the ability to really select for animals that are more feed efficient. And I think this is huge economically. It's not just that big cows are inefficient and small cows are efficient. There is that relationship for sure. Bigger cows tend to be less efficient and smaller cows tend to be more efficient. But there are also big efficient cows and small inefficient cows. This trait is the first step toward being able to select for animals that are more feed efficient. I think this is really a neat tool and is going to be a game changer for us. So how do we take this and bring it into genomic testing? We have a lot of new opportunities now in front of us with genomic testing. A lot of people will wonder, how does genomics work? What do they do? basically, we're looking at the genes that the animal actually got. She gets copies of the genes, or he gets copies of the genes from both parents. And we see what genes that this particular animal has, and we look at differences at the code. I shouldn't say we, because it's definitely not me. This is way smarter people than me. They look at the differences in the DNA code that causes variation in traits. And then they have a database of all the animals that have been tested, all the bulls and females that have been tested, and that database keeps growing, right? So genomics keep getting more accurate as we get more and more animals in the system. Now the gains are pretty small at this point, but we still keep adding more information. So they look and they say, well, here we have this female that's born, a baby calf, and she has these set of genes, and we look at the database and we compare the commonality of genes, and we put them into a big equation to predict the performance of the animal based on correlation between genes and performance. So if they have these combination of genes, they're more likely to give more milk. If they have these combination of genes, they're more likely to be taller or whatever. And that's how genomics works. Really, it's amazing. It's amazing science that's been put into action here. So what are the benefits of doing genomic testing? The first one is correcting parentage issues. And if you start doing genomic testing and you've not done it before, you're in for a surprise. You're in for a surprise at how many animals have parentage issues. They say on average it's about 10 to 15% of the animals. Now some herds are better at this than others, but there will be some animals that you identify that had a different parent than what you thought. Maybe two calves were born on the same day and you can't tell which one's which, or somebody messed up the pack. It helps us to identify those genetic defects, those recessive traits. Who carries the HH5? Who carries the HCD? It helps us to reduce inbreeding. We can do a better job in reducing inbreeding if we have genomic testing. It allows us to cull the low-end heifers, and we'll talk about how to do that here in a bit. It allows us to better target our semen use. Where do we use sex semen versus conventional semen versus beef semen? It allows us to make faster genetic progress because we're able to select on the female side in addition to the male side. And it allows us to identify desirable traits, things like the pole gene or A2 or red may be desirable for some people, or the slick gene for heat tolerance. So there are desirable traits, not just undesirable traits that we might want to select for. I like real world data, so I've pulled some real world data here. This is a herd where I have a couple of cows, and we picked out a cow a couple of years ago that we were interested in. And we picked her out because of her PTA milk. And this on the x-axis here we have PTA milk. This is her genetic prediction for milk. On the y-axis we have ME milk, and you can see that within one herd, this is just a simple snapshot of data from PC Dart, that trend is there. The higher milk cows tend to be, the ones that are predicted to be higher milk tend to be higher milk. And that cow that we picked out because she was so high PTA milk, that's her. That's her way up there. Right now, she's at 150 days in milk, at 150 days in milk, second lactation, she's already given 25,000 pounds. Genomics work. Now there's some outliers here. It's not a perfect relationship, but it's real. This was a data set from the University of Wisconsin, and they compared just within a relatively large university herd, what did they see in terms of actual milk production difference? So the top 25% genetic animals for milk production compared to the bottom 25%, 5,000 pounds of production within a herd. Selecting for milk makes a difference in terms of actual milk. Here we can just even look at something like somatic cell score. This is one point in time. Look at the PTA for somatic cell score versus the most recent test somatic cell score. It's not as strong of a relationship, but it's real. The higher somatic cell score genetic animals tend to be the higher somatic cell score animals. This was a California herd. I saw they posted some data on Facebook, and I asked them if I could put this in. This was a large herd. The animals that had a PTA somatic cell score less than 3 compared to those greater than 3, almost 75,000 difference in somatic cell score or somatic cell count. So this data really reflects we can select for lower somatic cell count. Repro, some neat work Jeff Stevenson showed recently. If we take the days open for cows based on their daughter pregnancy rate, boom, boom. Lower days open based on the ones that are supposed to be more fertile. Higher conception rates for the ones that are more fertile. And the ones that are more fertile give more milk because they spend more time in peak lactation. Similar data set from Wisconsin, top 25% to bottom 25%. 20 days difference in average days open. And this is that California herd. Those animals that have a DPR negative 2.2 or below, 172 days open, compared to those with a DPR of 1.5, 112. Wow, 60 days difference. This is one herd data, just a snapshot from a couple of weeks ago. We can do, sometimes I think some of our fertility issues are genetic. They're not heat stress, they're not feed, they're genetic. And this is just showing differences in conception rate for high and low repro. Fertility, we can select for more fertile animals. And I think Brandon mentioned earlier how important this is in a hotter climate. I think we should put more emphasis on daughter pregnancy rate in a hotter climate because fertility is such a challenge for us in the summertime. Okay, sometimes I hear some things about genetics and why it doesn't work. And here's one that really puzzles me. I showed you that cow earlier, 3918, that gave 78,000 pounds. Now, if I pull up her genetic evaluation, this is her December genetic evaluation. Doesn't look very good. She's negative 214 net merit, and she's actually negative 116 pounds of milk. But she's the world record holder for milk production. So am I telling you that she's a bad cow? Definitely not. That's a good cow. But let's keep a few things in mind. She was born in 2010. She's an old cow. With $77 of net merit improvement each year, she's the equivalent of 566 net merit today. She's also in a very high production herd. She's not giving 78,000 pounds in a 20,000 pound herd. A lot of things had to go right in her life to do that. Lots of things had to go right. She didn't get sick. She was born the right time of the year. She was cared for well, got the right colostrum. Everything in that cow's life has had to go right for her to do that. Remember, P equals G plus E. What we see, the phenotype is the genetics plus the environment. Also, why is her net merit low? She's high somatic cell score. She's really negative for daughter pregnancy rate. She's negative for productive life. She's negative for livability, meaning she's not, that tends to be the cow that tends to die on farm rather than getting to sell her. So her net merit's low because she's a heck of a milk cow, but genetically, she leaves a lot to be desired in terms of the fitness traits. Milk is only part of the story. If you want to prove the system wrong, if you want to say genetics doesn't work, you'll find some examples. You've got to look at averages, not individual cows. If you look at individual cows and you say, well, the best cow in my herd, it tells me not to breed her. Well, how are you defining the best cow in your herd? You will find some anomalies because of this. P equals G plus E. You've got the environmental impact in addition to the genetics. And that's why I think it's important if we're comparing things, make sure we're making the right comparison. If you say the best cow in your herd is the cow that gives the most milk today, that's a different definition than the cow that has the best net merit, because net merit's looking at the overall profitability. If we want to compare things, we got to compare milk to milk or type to type, not milk to net merit, not milk to daughter bonus profit, not net merit to type. Making the wrong comparison will give you the wrong result. And remember, the indexes factor many things in together. One of the most important things that I think we've learned so far in thinking about the Milk 4.0 program is that unique identification is essential. You cannot do a genomic test if the animal does not have a unique identification. Because if I have cow 424 in my herd, and Fred has 424 in his herd, and Brandon has 424 in his herd, it goes into the computer system and it says, this is the same cow. You have to have a unique identification. The best way to do that is to have what's called an 840 number. 840 is the US code. It's an official RFID type of attack. That's the best way to do it. You don't have to have that though. The old brucellosis type vet tags, the metal tags, right now those will work. The good news is that right now in Kentucky, the state's vet office is giving those RFID tags for free. So if you want to get official ID, you can get those tags for free. Maybe you already have them. If your cows are registered, you already have them. If you're using the vet tags, you already have them. But you can't submit a sample unless they have unique ID. So who should we think about testing? How should we prioritize? Where are we going to get the most value? Baby heifer calves. That's the first priority. Next priority, older heifers. Next priority, first lactation cows. Last priority, mature cows. Depends on where you want to put your money. But I think to a large degree, the mature cow, the reason that she's on the bottom is that going to change a decision? If you get a cow, fourth lactation cow, and it says she's negative 200 net merit, and she just gave 35,000 pounds, you going to call her? No. Are you going to breed her? Probably so. It doesn't necessarily change your decision. If it makes a decision whether you breed her to dairy semen or beef semen, maybe so. But you got to think about the priority. The thing about the baby heifer calves is we've got a lot of decision points where that information can be used. This is a normal distribution or a bell curve. It's really important to think about and thinking about this data. If we do a bunch of animals in our herd within an age group, they will be normally distributed. There will be some that are really high for net merit and some that are really low for net merit. There will be some that are higher for milk and lower for milk. We're going to see that shape within a herd. And when we compare them to their parent average, they're also going to be normally distributed around their parent average. So if the parent average between the cow and the bull is 500, most of them are going to be around 500. We might get a few out here at 700 net merit, and we might get some over here at 300 net merit. But more of them are going to be around the parent average. But here's what happens, and this is where I think genomics gets really neat. These are three full brothers. And let's look just simply at net merit. Game Day, one of the top bulls available right now, he's 916 net merit. Here's a full brother of his who's 739 net merit. Here's a full brother of his whose net merit is 656. This bull's top of the breed. This bull's good. This bull probably we pass on. So this bull's around the parent average. This one's way above the parent average. This one's below the parent average. A lot of differences as we look through those proofs of those bulls. And this is where genomic evaluation comes into play. We identify these guys to use and these guys maybe not to use. So how do we think about a plan for using the information? One of the biggest places we can use this information is in our young animals, determining which animals we want to bring into the herd. We start by figuring out how many animals do we need. If we have a 100 cow herd with a 33% culling rate, we probably need 35 to 40 heifers per year. But if we leave things on their own, we end up having 45 heifers per year. So the number of heifers that we have drives the decision of how many animals to cull. And we can use spreadsheets. This is an individual herd basis, the number that we keep versus the number we call. But if we think about it taking $2,000, $2,500 to raise a heifer, if we sell 5 to 10 low genetic merit heifers, we reduce our heifer rating cost by $10,000 to $25,000 per year. We reduce our costs considerably, but also while we're doing that, we're improving the genetic merit of the herd because we're only keeping the best animals in the herd. So let's think about how we could do this in another way. We test 10 heifers, and these are the results we get. Let's say these are net merits, okay? We look at these net merits, and this heifer is $34 net merit. This one's $14 net merit. We call those two. So we actually improve the average net merit of this group of heifers from 354 to 437. It's a difference of $83. Lifetime profit with the lifetime of the animal of 3 years. That's $55 per year advantage in net profit, just by cutting out these two bottom animals. So there's two different ways we can affect the economics. Here we're reducing our heifer raising costs, and here we're improving our net profit because we're keeping better animals in the herd. Another thing that's important to remember is that the value of testing increases over time because future generations benefit more. We keep multiplying because if we're selecting better animals now, they pass the better animals on to the next generations. Here's another interesting example. These are our two calves born 2 days apart. Really big differences in these two calves. One of them happened to be an ET calf. The other one was supposed to be an ET calf, but it wasn't. Look at the differences in net merit here. This one's 721. This one's 107. Now, if we just thought the world was only about milk, actually, this heifer's the better heifer. She's plus 995 milk compared to plus 732. But look at how much higher fat this one has, 0.18 compared to negative 0.06. Look at how much lower somatic cell score this one is. Look at how much more productive life and higher livability and more resistance to mastitis. So when I look at these two and I say, which one do I want to build more out of? It's this one. 2 days apart. Phenotypically, they look the same, but genetically, very, very different animals. We can also think about how we can use this to change our breeding strategy. And this is a slide that I modified from Albert de Vries. We start with the virgin heifers. They have the highest genetic merit. If we're doing genetic selection right, our virgin heifers have the highest genetic merit. First lactation a little lower, and the older animals are continually lower genetic merit. We might think about those virgin heifers. Some of them might be high enough, we might do some ET work. Maybe those are donors. The next group, we use sex semen. The bottom group, maybe those are recips for embryos. Our first lactation animals, maybe the highest ones are sex semen, and the lower ones are conventional semen. Then as we move out here into the older animals, we maybe just only use conventional semen, and then we use beef semen on the older, lower animals. Now there's a couple of other things to point out here. Notice that these graphs overlap each other. So it's not saying that, for example, the top animal in the third lactation is about the same as the bottom virgin heifer. So it's not that always the virgin heifer is the best one, but we can use that individual information for the genomic testing to make better decisions about who we want to get replacements out of and who do we use beef semen on. Again, I think this can be really overwhelming. When you get genomic tests back, it's information overload. Start by looking at the indexes, whether it's net merit, daughter wellness profit, TPI, or whatever. Start there. Make sure you really only focus on ranking animals within the birth year or smaller groups. Your old cows, you're going to look at them and go, but my old cows are my best cows, and it says they're negative net merit or they're 100 net merit. That doesn't mean they're bad. We need to compare within the birth year. If we're doing that kind of comparison, how did we do within the 5th lactation birth year? Not compare the 5th lactation cows to our heifers. Begin with the end in mind. How am I going to use this information to change my decisions? And there are tools. Use the spreadsheets that are out there. They're web tools, herd management software to help determine how to use this information. And don't get lost in the tree. 60 traits on each animal if you do genomic testing. Keep your eyes on the big picture. What are we trying to do here? We're trying to select for more profitable animals. So maybe it's more pretty animals, whatever it is. Focus on the big picture and don't get lost in the weeds there. Another point I want to make is that although I'm not a big fan of bull breeding as a whole, and I always want to remind us of the disadvantages of bull breeding. There's human safety dangers. We end up sometimes spreading venereal diseases. Maybe we don't have a fertile bull. We don't necessarily make as much genetic progress. We don't have as much genetic diversity. Cost of buying a bull, sometimes higher than AI. We don't know the due dates, and we can have inconsistent dry periods. So there are some disadvantages to using a bull. But if we're going to use a bull, select from genomic tested bulls. There are plenty of genomic tested bulls available out there. There are ones that just weren't quite good enough for AI. And it's a lot better selection pressure than just selecting a good bull out of a good cow in a good herd. And remember that 10 to 20% of animals are misidentified. So you might get a bull thinking it's out of a particular cow and it's not even out of that cow. The reliability of information when we have genomic testing goes from about 45 to 50% up to 70%. And we can select for all the traits just like AI bulls. If we want to select for healthy animals, we can put the selection pressure on wellness traits or daughter wellness profit. In actuality, available bulls or herd bulls are better than some of the 3 to 5 year old AI bulls that are out there. And be cautious again of negative recessives. If I'm looking for a herd bull, I try to avoid those negative recessives because we're going to get a lot of calves out of that. And I would argue that genetic selection in a bull bred herd is even more critical than an AI bred herd because you get so many calves out of that bull. And then those cows have calves. So you're spreading those genes over many generations. Bull selection in natural service herds is really, really important. We talked just a little bit about the Milk 4.0 program that Kentucky Dairy Development Council is just starting and launching. You have to be on DHI to be part of this program. You have to be testing 2 times per quarter. If you're interested in signing up for this, they're ready to start working on this. We've worked on a couple of herds as sort of pilot herds for this, but this project is starting to launch now. I think it's an exciting opportunity for Kentucky dairy producers to be able to get into this area. And if you haven't seen the notice yet, there is a road show coming up here in a couple weeks. So 3 different locations for that, and you'll see more information about that. There are multiple pieces of the new Milk 4.0 program. It includes the genomic option. There's also some economic incentive for improving your pregnancy rate, for reducing your somatic cell count, and for doing financial records analysis. Bottom line, don't fall behind the competition. The most aggressive herds are really putting the accelerator on in terms of genomic selection and genetic strategies now. Today's genetic opportunities might change your business strategy. It gives us the opportunity to breed for better health, better reproduction, and eventually heat tolerance. And remember, you need to increase your threshold every year. We're making $77 net merit progress every year. So your threshold for the level of bull that you're willing to use should keep moving up with that. And genomics can be a part of a strategy to make good genetic progress. Hopefully you have some additional ideas about genetics and genomics now. It's an exciting area. moving forward, if any of you have any questions or anything specific that you want to work with, don't hesitate to reach out. And I'm happy to take any discussion or questions that you guys have now.
Appreciate Jeffrey's time this morning. If anyone has any questions, feel free to unmute yourself at this time and ask, or type your question into the chat box.
I'll throw this out. Then if there's not questions directly right now, those of you that are on the call that are milking cows right now, if you've thought about doing genomic testing, how do you think you're going to use it in your herd? I know some of you I've talked to, and I know you're playing line. Fred, are you gonna try any?
We plan to.
Go ahead.
Yeah, we plan to. Especially my dad saw the talk on it there at the partners meeting a couple of weeks ago. I think he's excited to give this a whirl.
How do you think you're going to use it?
I don't know that we've got that far along yet as to which one of these directions to go with it. Like I said, I neglected to say a while ago when we were talking about cow traits, when I said we were breeding polled, we've also been doing A2 polled, which even narrows the scope a lot farther. So I would like to see how far along we are with that too.
Sure. Yeah, I think those are both important traits for the industry moving forward.
I thought that when they checked those heifers the other day out there, that the guy from Zoetis said that they could draw the line where they know that the heifer would never make it through the first lactation. If they can tell what that trait is, and she can't make it through the first lactation, for whatever the reason might be, that's going to be vitally important because, you know, even if you don't have the heifer to replace her, you'd be better getting rid of her and buying a cow back or a heifer back. But you're going to put a whole lot of money in her for nothing.
I agree.
And you know, as you go down the road, whatever stage of the dairy game you're in, whether whether you're building to make a better herd, or if you have good genetics, when you decide to exit the dairy, there'll be people looking at your cows on that evaluation, and it may add value to your cattle.
Yeah, it's been kind of neat. I've worked with some people to help identify some genomic tested females to bring in as first lactation animals, and it's really quite impressive when you see what you get in selecting for those animals. You get what's advertised. You know what genes they're carrying, not just what they look like. What they look like is important, but you know a lot more. Brandon, how do you think you're going to use it?
Also, that when you do that and you look back into the herd a little bit, I'm not saying you need to go to the fourth lactation cow, but maybe pick up a few of the first and seconds and cows that you know are working for you. And then you compare them to what your young stock is and kind of help you think if you're going in the right direction. But all of us that have bred AI for years, we probably never checked very many cows. And we put a lot of time and a lot of selection in, and it'd be interesting to see how we progress with our life of work.
It will be. I think that, you know, sometimes you're going to find some things you didn't want to know. You're going to find some families that are carriers of recessive genes, or you're going to think that you're going to get a fourth lactation cow or fifth lactation cow that's negative 200 net merit. That doesn't mean she's a bad cow. It just means she might not be the best dam of the next generation.
So I agree with what David said. I'm kind of doing my DNA testing for 2 or 3 different reasons. Of course, everybody wants to see something that ranks high, but I also want to see how well the animals that work with and compare that with heifers that's coming on. Like he said, I think that'll be very important on an individual herd basis. But I'm also hoping that I can eventually market some genetics. That's the other part of why and I know not very many people do that anymore, but that's the other reason behind doing some DNA testing for me.
Right. Yeah, if somebody like, you know, Brandon wants to take some time, and Brandon and I have talked about this, but you know, you've got some high-range animals, maybe you really multiply those genetics and do a little bit of ET work on some of those. Can we really advance things very quickly that way? Any other questions from anybody in the group? Anything that's not clear, or things that you want to know about genomics that you don't know today?
Frequently test dates, make sure it's children don't turn out like you.
Yeah.
Well, if there's no other questions, go ahead, David.
You hear Mr. Harder? He wants them to test you, Nick. No comment.
I'm sure I would be an outlier in the data set, and it would just be an argument over on which side I would be outlying, I guess.
Well, chances are, Nick, you're just like a bull. You'd be good on some things and not good on some others.
Likely so. You know, as we're wrapping up, I've thought at different times today. Of course, I do some DNA testing on beef animals, and from time to time, I have full siblings, have 2 embryo or 3 or 4 embryo bulls for sale that are full siblings, and you know, their EPDs will be slightly different, as Jeffrey explained earlier, and sometimes I have customers say, I just can't understand why you have, you know, these 3 or 4 bulls and they're full siblings, but yet there's so much difference in between these animals. And the story I always share is, well, you know, I've got 2 brothers, and I'm the best looking, smarter than one of all 3 of us. We're full family, but we're all each a bit unique. And if my brother's around, he's quick to remind the individual that, you know, I'm also the one that's got the biggest line of baloney of the 3 of us as well. And so genomics and genetics can tease our brains some days, and but it's definitely an interesting subject and area we can all afford to learn more about.
Yeah, and this program, you know, being able to do these tests with the cost share, you guys are going to be able to do it cheaper than anybody. And it's a little different economically when you can do it at this price. It's not free though, so you have some skin in the game, and that's why, again, I think it's important to think about how you use the information.
How fast do you think, like in say 20 years ago, if it took in 10 years progress, now we're probably gonna make 10 years of progress in 2 years. Is that a correct evaluation, or 3 years probably? I mean, it's really fast.
Probably in that, probably closer to 3 years, but it's important to think about too, in terms of progress of profitability, not just progress of milk. I think we aren't going to make as fast or rapid progress on milk production in the next decade because we're focusing on so many additional traits, important traits, like the longevity and fertility and health traits and so forth. But when we add the selection on those, we're reducing how much selection we're making on milk production individually. But I think overall, yes, I think that's the kind of speed that we're talking about. It's probably 3 times as fast. And I is one of the most important reasons to really think about doing more emphasis on genetic selection, because if you don't, you're going to fall behind. You know, you may be doing the same selection for milk production, and you wonder why your cost of production higher than somebody else. And the reason is because they've been selecting for healthier, more fertile animals. And so you want to be competitive with those that are putting the selection on that more balanced animal, that invisible cow that Donna talked about. Just, I think it's got to be a part of the strategy. And you know, people like me, and Brandon, and David, we dig into this stuff and we study the bulls and so forth. You don't even have to be a genetics geek to be good at it. You just have to pick an index. And if you just pick an index and say, in 2021, I'm not going to use any bulls less than 800 net merit, and then you take a genomic selection strategy of knocking out the bottom 10% of your herd, you're going to make a lot of progress. You don't have to study it for hours and hours. Just pick a threshold, make your semen deals, and move forward.
I read an article, it's been a year or so ago, and they was talking about genetic progress, whether you're the guy that does the embryos and breeds for the top bull, or you're the guy that buys the herd bull. They're all going to move forward in genetic progress because the guy that gets the herd bull is buying it from the guy that's closer to the front of the train, and he's just several years back. He's riding towards the back of the train. But there's got to be, if you're too far in the front, if you make the wrong decisions, you can be unprofitable. If you're too far in the back, you're always way behind. You know, so there's you got to make some good decisions if you're at the front. The safest spot would probably be more in the middle of the train, you know, but you know, it's where a guy wants to be in his quest for what he's trying to get accomplished, I guess too. They're all gonna get better though.
That's right. I'd say I'd want to be in the second car, not the first car. Not the first car, because you'll hit something now and then. And some of that, you know, using the $100 unit of semen doesn't really make much sense economically unless you're really marketing animals. But I think you can be in that second car quite economically. Well, thanks a lot, everybody, for your time today. And don't hesitate if there's anything I can do to help you as you move into this. Please don't hesitate to reach out. Thanks again, Nick and Pat and Ricky, for the invitation to come talk to you guys today.
Thank you again, Jeffrey, and thanks again to everyone who attended today's program.
Thank you.